Hello, welcome to Movie Break. This is the second episode of our series of Derek Cianfrance. Kristen, how did the first episode go? How'd you like it?
Pretty well. I think it was interesting to try to articulate ourselves on video about a movie. So I'm interested to try it again and hopefully get better at it over time. What about you?
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun talking about that movie. It's cool to talk about movies that you like. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's what we do anyway. So
Anyway,
might as well record ourselves.
Now we're basically just putting it on the internet for other people to see instead. Normally these conversations, would just be us without other people around.
So the first episode that we did was on Blue Valentine, Derek Cianfrance's first film. So the second film that we're going to do today is Place Beyond the Pines. Personally, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Kristen, your first thoughts rewatching Place Beyond the Pines. I know you had seen it before, so rewatching it's been a couple years. What was your take?
I think I liked it more than I had previously, or maybe connected with it more than I had before. Funny stories, I had actually confused it with some parts of Lost River, which also has Ryan Gosling in it, but a very different storyline. And so coming back to watch Place Beyond the Pines again, I realized pretty quickly that I had mixed them up, and it was actually a different movie than I had remembered it being.
Wildly different movies.
Yeah, quite different. All around. Don't quite know how that thought process happened, but definitely different than I had remembered.
So I think the interesting thing with this movie is that it does share a lot of characteristics with Blue Valentine, specifically the family kind of dynamic. We talked a little bit about that in Blue Valentine. So kind of seeing his first movie into this film, just what are your takes? Like, can you see the resemblance from Blue Valentine to here, or?
I think that he's definitely really interested in any sort of, relationships, whether those are romantic relationships, family relationships, just kind of generational things, like how, we bring in so much of our lives from our parents or our grandparents that we didn't necessarily even know the story about them, and how much that impacts us despite the knowledge even.
It's interesting too because it's interesting to have watched I Know This Much Is True, and then to kind of rewatch Place Beyond the Pines. I think Place Beyond the Pines is kind of a lot of ways like a trial and error for moving forward with I Know This Much Is True. Just with the whole kind of generational leading up to different choices, and those choices having those consequences. Like I said, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't want to criticize it too much because I still genuinely really love this movie, and I would still probably say it's one of my favorites. I do feel like bits of it are rushed as to where I think I Know This Much Is True is able to kind of flesh those things out more. I mean, this movie, it's not short. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I could have watched another hour and a half or so. I kind of wish it was a little bit longer to kind of flesh out a little bit more of the characters a bit. But
do you feel like the medium was the wrong choice? Like perhaps it should have been a mini-series instead of a movie? Like would that have given you more of the details that you were looking for, and because personally to me, I don't think it felt rushed. I felt like it was a pretty appropriate length, but it sounds that wasn't the case for you.
No, I don't necessarily think that it would have been better as a miniseries. I think like The Godfather, for example, is able to kind of flesh out a lot of that information. I know, Godfather 1 and 2 kind of split the generational thing. Those are two separate long movies. But I feel like just there were some things that maybe in the second and third part of the stories that I kind of wished did have a little bit more time to flesh out, specifically in the third stage of this movie. I kind of wish there was a little bit more drawn out in a sense. So for those who don't know or haven't seen this movie, it came out in a limited release in 2012, more of a commercial release in 2013. It essentially is a 3-part movie. The most, I guess, advertised part of the movie, and probably what you see if you're scrolling on Netflix or you're looking at the movie, is the Ryan Gosling portion.
Yeah, stills from Ryan Gosling in particular, which is interesting because I think that I find it surprising there aren't more stills or more just exploration of Bradley Cooper's character or then the son's characters and all of that as well. I thought that was interesting because I think when you're only looking at the stills from Ryan Gosling's part, it kind of leads you to believe it's a different movie than it is, or like that's only a piece of the movie when you're actually watching it. But
yeah, I am really impressed, and I don't want to come across like I don't like this movie because I really do love this movie. I am really impressed about the ability to be able to kind of shift from story to story. I think it handles it very well, and I think that's very hard to do from going to character to character to character.
I agree.
And to be able to kind of switch genres a bit, and it all is kind of in the idea of like kind of a crime aspect of it. The first half's more of a bank robbing kind of story, and then it goes into more of maybe like kind of a cop thriller investigation type thing. And then it turns more into, in the last stage, I think a little bit more of a kind of, I don't know what you would call that, I guess. Maybe more of a...
Probably like a generational kind of exploration of how the choices that both of their dads impacted the both of them. Like, I mean, you can see just kind of how those stories interconnect, because I think you can see Ryan Gosling's character and then interconnecting with Bradley Cooper and kind of seeing how those things can still kind of mesh later, despite not necessarily suspecting that those would interweave themselves, but they end up doing so.
Yeah. So this is going to be a spoiler conversation. It's kind of hard to talk about this movie without talking about spoilers. So I guess we'll kind of give like a general overview. So it starts out as Ryan Gosling. He's kind of like a carny motorcycle guy that kind of comes into random towns, travels around with this group. And then he kind of stops in Schenectady, New York, and he meets a young woman that he had a relationship with, a one-night stand with about a year ago, and then finds out that she's pregnant, or that she had his child, that she had his child, and wants to kind of stick around and kind of be there as a father figure. And then without any means and without having availability to, actually take care of the child, he then kind of leads into the crime, and then that leads into Bradley Cooper's character later in the movie, and then that leads into their children kind of coming into paths with each other. I think some of my favorite movies, it's interesting too because his first two movies, Derek Cianfrance, Blue Valentine and Place Beyond the Pines, they feel very book-like. Like they feel like they're based on these kind of great American novels. And they're not. They're kind of just original ideas. And then it's interesting that his later two projects after these were both based on books. I don't know. So, because I think because it's marketed more as the Ryan Gosling movie, I think that kind of does point into its favor of being able to kind of... I think you don't want to come in with as much information as possible because you want to have those kind of the story play out in front of your eyes. And I think if you let go that, Bradley Cooper's in this movie and it's going to be also about Bradley Cooper, it kind of spoils it a bit. So I think coming into the movie without knowing as much as possible is kind of beneficial. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that it would have been fine to have more stills or more, kind of advertising leaning towards Bradley Cooper as well. And I say that because ultimately he's half of the movie. And I do think that the ads that just kind of showcase Ryan Gosling and Eva Mendes can be a little like, you think it's a different movie potentially than it is. And, honestly, I sort of find Ryan Gosling's story a little bit more compelling to me than Bradley Cooper's personally. Not extremely so, but I actually... if I had to kind of side with a character, surprisingly, I think I like Ryan Gosling's character more than Bradley Cooper's. I think his flaws are more, for lack of a better term, I think he feels less conniving and less deliberately deceitful. Versus, to me, Bradley Cooper feels very slimy. At times, and just very, very politician and very just always thinking about his own interest. And I know that's not, the further you go into the movie, you know he has a conscience and he does regret a lot of his actions, but he does feel very like politician in a negative way.
It's funny to say that because I think, because it's more known as like the Ryan Gosling movie, and people kind of find that part of the movie the more compelling. When I think of this movie, I think more of the Bradley Cooper story, to be quite honest. I think of that and like his choices and those consequences that affect his family and other families in that town. That's kind of what I think of. Which would you rank the three stories as your kind of favorites? I'm interested.
Rank the characters instead of the stories necessarily?
Sure, yeah, if you want to, because I think it's different, right? Like ranking the characters you like versus the story itself. So do you like Ryan Gosling's character more, but don't like his story more, or?
No, I think if I had to choose the story and the character, I would choose him as the top contender personally. I do find Bradley Cooper's story compelling, but I don't find him likable, which I think impacts how I feel about the story because I don't like him. And Ryan Gosling, yes, of course, he's very flawed, very, he has his own stuff that lends him to being less likable, but somehow he feels more redeeming to me. Maybe I have, I don't know, harbored some dislike of politicians or some kind of like, I associate him in such a way that I don't like
even
him.
though he's doing something very violent, like robbing a bank and holding people at gunpoint, and he's a violent person. We see him like attack another guy. We see him.
I don't think
people.
he has any illusions though of thinking of himself as the good guy though. I don't think that he does. Versus I think Bradley Cooper, no matter what he does, has deluded himself into being like, I am the good guy in this story. Even though there are times where it's like, you are actually not the good guy in this story. And I think that is in some ways the difference to me is I feel like Ryan Gosling has no illusions about what he's doing. I mean, I know that he thinks he's doing it for the betterment of his life in the sense of like, I'm going to rob these banks so then I can provide for my child and all of those things. But on the same end, like, I think that Bradley Cooper is just like in his focus on being a cop and then turning into an attorney. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like he's very calculated. Versus Ryan Gosling, other than a few robberies, I mean, he's pretty stupid, honestly. I mean, he was bound to be caught. He was being reckless. Like, that was without a doubt going to happen. But somehow I just find him more earnest is the wrong word, but just he feels more like a real person. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about
No, that makes
those
sense.
things.
What I find interesting, and I think what has aged the best about this movie is the class politics of this movie, and it goes to show how both of them are trying to do the best they can to kind of better their situation when it comes to their family and their choices. And Ryan Gosling, his only talent really is that he can ride a motorcycle, and so it just turns out that he's really good at riding a motorcycle, so he can rob a bank very successfully when it's calculated. And Bradley Cooper does something very similar where, they're both breaking the law and they're both doing very shady things. It's just so happened that Bradley Cooper is very calculated because of his education and because of the situation he's in, he's able to kind of rise above that and be able to build a complete new facade and career for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a lot more in common than they do differences in actuality. They're both very impulsive.
They're both the same. They
both have kind of hair trigger tempers. Honestly, they both are just, in a lot of ways, have very similar goals. In some ways, it's just that the kind of outcome of each of them is totally different. For one, based on how they came into this world. I mean, we're looking at Bradley Cooper, had a dad who was an attorney, was well connected, had more opportunity. We don't necessarily know Ryan Gosling's story, from his childhood, but the assumption is probably not great, and combined with the fact that we know he's a felon. So his likelihood of kind of that upward mobility is pretty low because he's not really able to get a job that pays enough to support himself, which of course leads to the bank robbing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that excuses the bank robbing necessarily, but I do think that you can see the means to an end there in his case.
Yeah. I think that's what's so interesting about all of Derek's movies is that they're all, for the most part, all of his works are like really associated with like working class people who, these aren't like high stakes necessarily. It's not, the world's about to explode or, superhero movies. They're just very, I need to do enough to be able to survive in America. I need to be able to provide for my family. I want to make my marriage work. They're very, they're everything, but on a very small level. And I just find that so very fascinating, you know?
Yeah, I mean, his characters across the board do feel like they could be real people, which I think differentiates him from a lot of directors or filmmakers in general. Is just that he wants to explore kind of the dynamics of everyday life as opposed to just like you're saying, the superhero movie or, some whatever kind of thing, high stakes for the world. Like this is high stakes for them though in their individual lives.
I really, to get back to what we were saying about like ranking them, I'd probably put the Kid's Story as third, then Ryan Gosling, and then Bradley Cooper's.
So you're more intrigued in some ways by Bradley Cooper.
I think it's more
story, maybe.
I think it's more complex on a certain level. I think Ryan Gosling's part is really interesting, and it's not that I'm dislike that portion. I just find Bradley Cooper's story of, did he act right on the interaction, he deals with Ryan Gosling? Like, did he shoot first or did Ryan Gosling's character first? And then that's spiraling into, he's around all these kind of corrupt cops. And I find it's really interesting too. I think like he was very well educated and he went to school to be a lawyer and then he just chose to be, just a regular cop. And then but then recognizes that he's too good. He thinks that he's too good to be just a regular cop at the end of the day and is going to do everything he can to kind of like skip the necessary steps for him to go that high. He's just going to use his situation to be able to kind of cheat the system and be able to kind of get a higher level in life. And I find that interesting, and I kind of find that more... I think these are both Ryan Gosling and Bradley Cooper's are very like American tales of like trying to survive in America, and I just find Bradley's more nefarious and more interesting and more complex.
I think Bradley Cooper's actions have more far-reaching consequences than Ryan Gosling's. Like I think in actuality, like Ryan Gosling robbing a bank, like again, not perpetuating, or advocating for bank robberies, but at the same point, it's money, not human lives. Versus Bradley Cooper's choices impact actual people, not just money. And so I think that differentiates it in a lot of ways is that Bradley Cooper, by being a patrol cop, by being a district attorney, I mean, he has a lot more power than Ryan Gosling really does. Because Ryan Gosling's power is, okay, I can steal, I don't know, maybe 10 grand at a time or something. But I'm not, he's not out to actually hurt anyone. Versus Bradley Cooper is in a position where it's like, kind of like the interaction with Ryan Gosling, like, I have control literally over whether someone lives or dies. Or even as an attorney, like, I have control over, in a lot of ways, of someone's life. Like, are they going to go to prison for years on years or whatever the case may be? And they're on very different power structures for sure.
So which one would you can rank them by character, I guess you like, if they're kind of interconnected. How would you rank them?
By character, I'd be kind of torn between Ryan Gosling's son and Ryan Gosling's character. I really like the both of them quite a lot. Bradley Cooper's son is absolutely 100% the worst.
But he's the worst, but I think it shows like That's such an interesting choice of like kind of this like rich kid who is like trying to act very street and trying to act like he's, you know, maybe coming from like a lower you know, status in life, and he's like, you know, wearing gold chains and like trying to act super hard when it's like he's coming from like a pretty privileged.
You're a rich attorney's kid. Like, calm down.
Exactly.
It's fine. But if I had to choose, definitely him at the absolute bottom of the barrel. After that, well, I don't know. If I'm ranking characters, if I'm basing it just on visceral, who do I like? Not even like beyond like the scope of the characters, but just who do I instinctively like the most? Definitely Ryan Gosling's son, and Eva Mendes's character. If it's based on who I really dislike, it's probably Bradley Cooper's son. I don't dislike Bradley Cooper necessarily. I dislike his choices, and I dislike the way that he carries his life, because I think he has a lot more of a negative impact on the world than Ryan Gosling, and he has deluded himself into I am the good guy and this is the bad guy, when in actuality the lines are a lot more blurred than that.
I think a criticism of this movie when it first came out was the that the first section, the Ryan Gosling section, was kind of the more flushed out, interesting portions, and then as the movie kept going on, it kind of became less directionless and just kind of
or more directionless? What do you mean? You said less directionless.
Oh, excuse me. More directionless, and didn't really have a kind of through line plot. It just kind of is just showing these characters. But I disagree. I kind of it builds the world a bit that they're living in, and kind of shows.
Yeah, I think if it had been too clean cut and just kind of by the lines, it wouldn't have felt like life. So I actually like that things like the way that things, you know, continue to happen feel more real to me than I think if it was just like by the numbers kind of like plot points. So I actually disagree that it becomes less interesting throughout. I think it becomes a different story, of course, but I don't think it's any less compelling necessarily. It's just different.
Yeah. So we really haven't talked about the third act that much, Kristen. So, you know, with the kids and, you know, their young teenage sons, what are your like overall opinions about that act? Because it's more about like the Bradley Cooper and Ryan Gosling section, then comes their children's sections. What's your opinion on that, I guess?
It does feel a little short, the section that just follows their their sons afterward. I would say in some ways I wish it were a little longer. On the other hand, it feels really interesting to just see kind of the difference in their kids and how they kind of live their lives, and the way they carry themselves is so different, and very representative of their backgrounds. Like, I think that, for example, Bradley Cooper's son kind of has this arrogance to him of just like the space that he occupies in the world. He's just so confident in a way that is actually kind of unwarranted. And I think that Ryan Gosling's son has this almost unsureness about himself, of just uncertainty about his life,
His lineage.
who he is literally, as well as just what that means for him on a day-to-day basis. He doesn't have this like over-the-top swagger that I feel like Bradley Cooper's son is trying to portray, even though of course it comes across as actually quite stupid and forced. But I think that it is interesting just to see how that plays out. On the other hand, I think one thing that's interesting about Ryan Gosling's son is you do see that he has inherited his dad's terrible temper and terrible impulsivity, in a way that, you know, we see play out throughout, is that he really has no impulse control. And that is certainly one thing that it seems he has inherited from Ryan Gosling.
Yeah, I find it so the third part, and that's where I was thinking of, you know, if this was a mini series or if this was able to be fleshed out a little bit longer. I think I'm more interested in like Bradley Cooper's like running as a politician. I do think it works for this movie, the whole him and his wife not working out. I think that I would have liked a little bit more of their marriage and just kind of their relationship, and like you can tell why it didn't work out, obviously, because he's so career oriented. But I don't know. I with this third act, I think it does work for what it is. I just kind of wish there was a little bit more fleshing out when it comes to the boys, and specifically Bradley Cooper's kind of character, and even Eva Mendes. I think she's such a big part of the first and second part, and then she kind of plays like fourth or fifth fiddle at the very end, and I want to know like their lives, and I want to know like what they're going through at this time, of like, because it seems like they've Eva Mendes in their life they're at least somewhat middle class, and they're at least kind of living their lives. I just kind of I don't know, I want to know what they're going through, and kind of like where they are in life,
Yeah, maybe a little bit more detail about how things played out for them after this experience. I know we see some of that with Eva Mendes, like, for example, after Ryan Gosling is dead, with the police showing up and essentially trying to take the money from their house with this, with no warrant even to do so. But it kind of stops there, and you're right, I think there could be more exploration of what happens with them afterward, and how she coped with Ryan Gosling not only not being there anymore, but being dead in this horrible kind of showdown with a cop, and then also just reconciling the idea of like what he was doing, like the bank robbery, and then how do I tell my son about this? Well, she didn't really tell him who his dad was. I mean, all of those things of like that internal kind of dialogue she must be having with herself of like, how do I talk to my son about his dad, and how much do I tell him?
Do you think this would have been better as a miniseries?
I mean, I don't think it necessarily would have been better. I think that it works the way that it is, but I think it could potentially be a little bit longer. I know then it would potentially seem too long for one single standing movie, so there's that, but I think it could have been a little longer potentially, but I don't know if it necessarily warranted a whole miniseries either.
Yeah, I don't know how much, I guess, you could flesh out a little bit more of the story. I think if it was closer to maybe the 3-hour range, I think it would have been able to get a little bit more out of it. Because at 2:20, it is long, but I feel like you could, get an extra maybe like 20 to 30 minutes out of this and be able to kind of flesh out the characters a little bit more, especially in the second half. I am left a little bit like wanting more a little bit of the world and the characters and everything. So
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe a little bit longer just to kind of air out, edge out some details for sure. Yeah.
So would you say, do you have any like, what are some criticisms, I guess, of the movie? Or are there anything that like you dislike about it, or you would maybe change here and there?
I think I would have liked a little bit more detail maybe about Ryan Gosling's backstory. Like, I think some more details. Like, I think more details about that. Potentially a little bit more details about Bradley Cooper's character in the sense of, like, why he wanted to be a cop when he was trained already as a lawyer. It feels a little open-ended in that sense. Like, I can see that at the start he's idealistic and he thinks, like, I want to be different than my dad, and I want to be on the front lines of things, and, like, not just be sitting behind like an oak desk all day, working on papers. But it feels a little like, I'm just curious what prompted that decision. And perhaps I'm looking at it from the mindset of someone who wouldn't have grown up in that kind of privilege. So part of me is like, why would you throw that away to be a cop? So maybe that's the piece of it that I question. Yeah. What about you?
As far as criticism, I don't know too much. I think just what I've kind of stated already is like maybe a little bit longer. I want a 5-hour long movie of Place Me on the Pines. No, but what
that might be a little much, just a little excessive.
What I do appreciate though is kind of the how history repeats itself, and just kind of how like little things of like, Ryan Gosling's kid loves to eat apples, and then you see him later as a child and he's eating apples. You see him being put in the same jail cell that Ryan Gosling was put in later in life, right? Like when he's arrested.
You see Ryan Gosling's son eating at the same ice cream shop that he has the picture with Eva Mendes at when the son was just a baby.
Yeah, and just like how history just kind of repeats itself, and we're just kind of, it's scary. I think that someone who maybe when you're not even alive can make a choice, and that will just
the ramifications just like go on and on and on. And I think too, it talks a lot about kind of the play of genes, right? Because like, for example, we can see Ryan Gosling's character pretty concretely in Ryan Gosling's son, of that like impulsivity, that temper, like that kind of sense of like, you screwed me over and I cannot let you do that. Like just that like revenge, that need for revenge. And I think too, we can see in Bradley Cooper's son just that like desire to be different than who he is, or desire to play a part in a lot of ways, or to separate himself from his dad in a way that actually to the outside world is like, what the hell do you think you're doing? But he needs to feel unique and different.
That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't. That's interesting that you put that out, because I never really put that together about how Bradley Cooper like clearly didn't want to be his dad, and then turns out being almost exactly like his dad.
And then Bradley Cooper's son wants to separate himself from his dad too, and be like, I am different than my dad. And that kind of idealistic urge to just like, I need to separate myself and be unique.
Yeah.
That they both have. And that sense of arrogance, I think, too, as well.
Do you believe in like the sins of the father passed down to the sins of the son? Do you believe in all that, or do you kind of, believe that everyone has their own destiny, and that, those choices are BS?
I think that's a big question.
Yeah.
I think we could go into the aspect of nature nurture for like 6 hours. Because I think we can think about the role of genes, like how much of your personality and who you are is defined by genetics and you have absolutely no control over, and then how much is defined by just like the nurture piece of it, of like, what childhood are you in, like what's the environment, like all of those things. So I think that it would be overly simplistic to say either one, to be like, oh, we're destined to end up like our parents. But I think, is it also overly simplistic or kind of naive to be like, oh, they have no influence? I think maybe middle ground is the only way I could turn with it, is like, obviously there's genetic influences, there's environmental influences. Like we can't say we're not influenced by our families completely, but do I think we're just like gonna immediately be like them? No.
Yeah. I find it a little depressing, the notion of like, you're born who you are, and you don't really have a choice, and like you're gonna be just like your parents, and you're already set on your journey, and that's what it's gonna be. I find that very kind of a depressing notion, and that's why I kind of like the ending so much, is because even though I think Ryan Gosling's son goes out and he gets a motorcycle and he's driving himself, but he's kind of making his own future, right? Like he's kind of he's getting out, he's leaving the town, and he's kind of going out on his own, and he's gonna become his own person.
There's still free will there, I think. Yeah. I think that if we assume that we're just 100% destined to just be like, the people we grew up with, that
he's breaking the cycle.
Yeah, so to speak. I think that's what it's trying to symbolize as, was like, Bradley Cooper's son, at least for this point, is still there, and perhaps he's really not going to separate himself from that life and his dad, versus, Ryan Gosling's son is like it's a very physical, like, I am leaving kind of thing as well.
I'm really impressed that this was an original idea. I was pretty shocked when I first watched this that it wasn't based on like a novel or any other pre-existing.
Yeah, it seems like a 3-parter novel to me. It does. It seems like we start off with, a third of the novel is like Ryan Gosling's character, then a third is like Bradley Cooper, and then the last third is like kind of the outcome of the son. So it is interesting that that wasn't the case for it to have, but I think it could have feasibly been a pretty good novel in terms of the structure and the story.
How long is the novel? Placed on 600 pages? More?
I mean, considering
probably
the movie, 1,000? I don't know about that long, but I mean the movie is 2.5 hours.
How long is I Know This Much Is True? How long is that book? That's probably like 900 pages,
Yeah,
right?
I can't remember the exact amount. I think it was 900 or
probably
so.
around there, right?
It was very, very long.
Yeah. So Place Beyond the Pines, I would say it's probably pretty...
I mean, I don't think I'd say maybe 500-600, and I say that because even in the miniseries, for I Know This Much Is True, the book I think was 900 pages or so, and there is still quite a lot cut that had to be cut. So I think if we're looking at a 2.5 hour long movie, it'd be like more like 400 or 500 pages, because even then there's still gonna have to be stuff that's cut to fit it.
So Kristen, what do you think this movie kind of plays in his filmography, I guess, compared to Blue Valentine? We haven't watched his other works yet, but just overall compared to this to Blue Valentine, where does it stand for you?
I think it's also very compelling. I think if I had to choose which one I like more, I would still side with Blue Valentine. I do think this one is more obviously far-reaching, more, I don't want to say maybe not epic, but just it's more expansive of a world than Blue Valentine is more just, this one couple, and like, yes, we get a little bit of their families, but more so just around these two characters, versus I think in The Place Beyond the Pines we see a lot more of how it impacts, almost really a whole town, a small town in upstate New York.
Do you think it's too wide scoping? Do you think if it was maybe more close-ended, it would be a little bit maybe more up your alley, or do you think?
No, because I think it explores an appropriate number of characters, and I think it explores them pretty, not fully, but pretty well. So no, I think that the scope is pretty well thought out, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the scope is just the right amount. I only say that because, again, like some of the criticisms of the movie when it first came out were very it's too big, it's too wide scoping, especially coming off of Blue Valentine. No, I think this movie is like massively underrated. I think it's kind of forgotten, and especially I think this is the best Bradley Cooper's ever been in a movie, quite honestly. I think Ryan Gosling's amazing. I think Eva Mendes is amazing. Ray Liotta, Mahershala Ali. This was the first time I saw him in a movie before he went on to be in like Moonlight.
Yeah.
I think he's absolutely amazing.
I think Dane DeHaan does a really good job.
Dane DeHaan's amazing, yeah.
I've certainly nothing but praise for the acting.
Yeah.
Throughout.
The acting's amazing. Yeah, and that also plays into, I think, the Blue Valentine aspect of just like kind of the naturalism of all the acting, and just kind of how raw and uncomfortable it is sometimes to watch. I think this one's interesting because I think there is more of a push point, and kind of there's always a driving force that maybe isn't in Blue Valentine. I think Blue Valentine is more just like you're sitting in a room with these characters, whereas I think with Place Beyond the Pines, you're more kind of sitting in the backseat of a car watching these characters kind of drive 90 miles an hour.
Drive into a train wreck.
Yeah, exactly. I just really enjoy this movie. I think it's such a great underrated movie.
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised it doesn't get more recognition. Kind of that's our opinion though of Derek Cianfrance in general. Like, why is no one, not no one, but why are there not more people who are really invested in this director? Who knows? They have bad taste. I'm joking. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys again for watching Movie Break. We appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to listen to our thoughts about these things. And other than that, we will be back in the future with yet another Derek Cianfrance movie.
Can you name the next one?
The Light Between the Oceans.
The Light Between the Oceans, yeah. We
Which,
both read the book.
Ooh, I did not like the book. Well, actually, I did not finish the book, so perhaps that's unwarranted. But I tried the book, and I did not like it. So I'm keeping my hopes low for the movie, knowing that I did not like the book. But that being said, thank you guys again for watching, and we will be back to cover The Light Between the Oceans.
Thank you.
Thanks.